Part 2 of our lecture on Africa from 1200 to 1450. What we have here, in our previous lecture we had talked about North Africa and West Africa. So today we're going to talk about East and South Africa. Our lecture in East Africa starts right here in the kingdom of Axum, or sometimes known as Ethiopia. Now, these people are already Christian because a long time ago in the classical period, Christianity had made its way up the Nile River into what is today Ethiopia, or at that time Axum. So these people are already Christian at the time. But around 650, 670, we see that Islamic armies had conquered across North Africa, separating the Christians in Africa from Christians in the rest of the world. And so we're going to get kind of a unique version of Christianity here. We see on the right-hand side an example of a Christian church in Ethiopia. This is a remarkable structure of a church that has literally been dug out of the rock. Everything that they didn't want to be church, they dug out, including the inside of the church. So we can see that it's in the form of a cross. So here's a great example of cultural diffusion. And we see a religion going from some place that it started to a new place. The people in Axum made their money, as we had seen in our last lecture, as middlemen. So if here you're living in Axum right here and you want to trade, it's always the same things that are going out of Africa at this point. It's either slaves, gold, or ivory. Those are the trade goods that Africa is exporting out at this point, and they will be taken down the Nile River to the Mediterranean. And so here we see those three trade goods. Here are the people who want them, and of course that makes Axum the middleman of the trade. And of course we've talked about how you want to be a middleman because then you get trade coming from both directions, and you can tax and control that trade. And so that's where Axum's wealth is going to come from. Not only are they the middlemen in the Nile River trade, but they're also the middlemen in Indian Ocean trade. And this part, if we had talked in previous lectures about the Indian Ocean, so the monsoon winds will blow this way. So if you're a Muslim merchant or an Indian merchant, you can trade in Axum and get some of these same trade goods coming out for Indian Ocean goods coming in. So they're kind of at the center of two trade routes, both a maritime and a river trade route. We're now going to talk about two crops that either one comes into Axum and is going to change the people of Ethiopia, or another one is leaving Ethiopium/Axum and going out. So let's talk about an import. So bananas originally come from over here in Southeast Asia, and as time goes on, they're traded in the Indian Ocean to India, and then of course through monsoon winds, people are going to bring bananas and seeds of bananas to Ethiopia. This is a crop that never seen before, and so when the people in Ethiopia get this crop, the population goes up because now the people have a new crop to grow in an area that it wouldn't grow, they didn't have a crop before, and this is a big source of not just calories but also potassium, and so we see the impact of a new crop coming over trade routes. Now let's go the other way. We're going to see that coffee is originally domesticated in Ethiopia, in this part of East Africa. And when Muslims start to interact with Ethiopian merchants, they're like, what is that you're drinking? I'm like, oh, it's this really good stuff. It's called coffee. And so we're going to see coffee make its way north into the Islamic world, and it'll become an important part of their culture. Here we see a couple of Arabic merchants exchanging coffee right there. And so, of course, this is going to be an important part of their culture because these coffee houses are going to open up in the Islamic world, and people will sit and they'll do business and they'll exchange gossip, and this very concentrated form of coffee with all its caffeine in it. And so these both examples of crops that are going back and forth across trade routes at this time. Let's move further down the coast now to the Swahili city-states. So if we go further south along the African coast, we get a whole bunch of port towns. Now these towns are never actually linked together in an empire, but they have a very similar language and culture, so as a group we call them the Swahili city-states, even though they all operate independently of each other. If you're going to remember one, I think the easiest one to remember is Zanzibar right here. So these towns operate once again as middlemen. Here's the Indian Ocean trade coming in. Now in here in Africa we have the same thing. We have slaves, we have gold, and we have ivory, right? Those are the things that are always coming out of Africa, and so they're found inside of Africa, and people trade them to the coast. And then we have Indian finished products, whether it be cotton textiles or silk or porcelain or spices. And right here, these city-states with their wonderful ports, they become the middlemen in these trade routes, and that's how they make their money. Each one operates independently of each other, since they're all these different far kind of flung city-states, but they all have, like I said, a similar culture. Now, not only do we call these Swahili city-states, but there's also a Swahili language that develops. So as we know, as Islam spreads and people convert, they start to be able to speak Arabic because that's what you have to read the Quran in. And so Arabic makes its way to this part of Africa, but instead of just taking Arabic in its entirety, these Africans, what they do is they blend it with their own African languages, and so we get what's called a new syncretic language. It's a blending of Arabic words and African words. You smash them together and you got a brand new language called Swahili. So here we see again this Islam is impacting the world as it goes from place to place. Eventually, the Swahili city-states will fall into decline at the end of this time period, around 1450, and the beginning of the next time period. And it's because we have this new group of people coming into the Indian Ocean. We're going to talk more about them in future lectures, but they are Portuguese from Europe. These Portuguese people, they've discovered through trade with other people gunpowder, and they've helped to invent cannons that use gunpowder. Now, they put these cannons on boats, and the Swahili people did not have cannons at this point. So when these Portuguese show up in the ports, the Portuguese want to just rob them and take over the ports and take their money and trade. That's why they're there, to get rich. And so we see that one by one, the Swahili city-states fall, and they're taken over by the Portuguese. And so that's the decline of the Swahili city-states. Let's now go further down the coast to Zimbabwe. And so here is Aksum, or Ethiopia, that we've talked about today. These are the Swahili city-states. And then down here inland, we see Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe is yet another middleman in the trade networks. So we had said that the Swahili city-states are getting gold, slaves, and ivory from inland. And they're getting them from, in part, the people of Zimbabwe, because they're inland. Now, the people in Zimbabwe get those same things even further inland. So here's the source of the slaves' gold and ivory, and so they trade those with Zimbabwe, who trades them with the Swahili city-states. The Swahili city-states are getting Indian Ocean goods, and then they're trading them with Zimbabweans, and then they're trading with the people here. And of course, we have another middleman. And of course, we've talked about before, they can tax this trade, they can control this trade, and they get rich on this trade. And so we see this large kingdom inland being developed. Up here in the picture, we see one of the Zimbabwe cities. It's walled for protection, and they would get the gold, slaves, and ivory from one direction, and then they would get the Indian Ocean goods from another, and then in these markets, they would get rich in trade. Eventually, the greater Zimbabwe kingdom is going to fall into decline. Some of the gold mines that they were getting the gold from is going to just run out of gold, and so that's one less trade good. And then also there's going to be a prolonged period of drought, which is going to make very hard for the population to live and thrive and survive, and the society just crumbles. And so that's it for our lecture.